This is going to be episode 3 of Common Misconceptions and Talking Points about Unions. Now, in case you haven't listened to episode 1 or episode 2, I encourage you to go back over there and listen to both of those, because we begin to talk about certain talking points, misconceptions, and things that people, preconceived notions, things that people bring to the table, whether it's a individual who is anti-union, or it's an employer, or it's somebody who's disingenuous, or it's just somebody that doesn't know. They bring their biases into the conversation. We see this all the time, and there are multiple ways this comes about. I'm reminded of an individual that I talked to. This was probably about 6 months ago. He was working for one of the contractors that I end up working around, and he's about 50, maybe 52, give or take, somewhere around that realm. And he said to me, when I was growing up and when I was younger, I had the mindset, screw the union. I didn't, I just based upon listening to other people talk. I mean, let's be honest here. Hollywood is not our friend either. It never, ever paints us in a good light. It always paints union members and unions in general in a negative light. It never paints them in the positive light when you start talking about every single significant or seemingly insignificant, I might add, workplace advancement for workers in general, whether it's any regard to safety at all, whether it's the 40-hour work week, the weekends, no child labor, all of that stuff and more. No one ever paints us in a positive light. And there's a certain reason for that. But he said, I had just brought this in, just taking little bits from different people, listening to little bits from other people. They're bringing their own ignorance to the table. And he said to me, knowing what I know now, I do wish that I would have joined a union, because I would have retirement benefits and I'd have healthcare coverage, and my job site conditions, although he wasn't complaining about them at all, he said, things would be different for me. And that's the reality. If you are young and you're listening to this podcast episode, the thing that people will play on the most for you is going to be the fact that you think as a young person that you're indestructible, that you're going to live forever, that all you want is your money in the pocket. That sounds fantastic, especially to someone who's 20 years old. But I have never met someone, never, and I mean never, emphatically never. I have never met someone who has said they saved too much for retirement. It's the opposite, actually. They say, I wish I would have saved more. I wish I would have saved longer. I wish I would have joined the union. I wish I could go back in time. And so before we get into the bulk of the podcast episode today, that is my encouragement to you. Many of those old timers that are talking to you, and this isn't even, the actual direction of this podcast episode, but I'll plug it in anyway. Many of those old timers that are talking to you, when they sit here and say things, especially when it's not in a accusatory manner or a derogatory manner. It's a, hey, young blood, let me talk to you for a second. Let me tell you about this. Let me tell you about that. They're trying to drop little nuggets of wisdom. It's for your best interest to at least listen without being dismissive right out the gate. And that's the case when it comes to the specific union talking points. Young people today are the most pro-union generation alive. And I'm here for it. But with access, without no gatekeepers to, gatekeep you from information, we now have to navigate through the misinformation and disinformation and propaganda, what I will explain in a second, to get down into common misconceptions about unions. Because if I just flood the information airwaves or the information word that's out there on the internet, then I can dilute the message, because I can make it harder for you to find information out. Well, that's what a podcast episode like this, and a podcast in general like this, is for. This is episode 3 of common union misconceptions by people. And we're going to talk about that. But I want to lay it just a smidgen more groundwork before we get into it. And here's what I mean. Yes, I do want to address each specific thing that we're going to talk about, each specific misconception going forward. And we will. But underneath all of that, if we peel the layers back a little bit, underneath all of that, what we're going to find are the real things that I want to tackle. And it's the propaganda. That's the word of the day. I have another podcast episode in the works. I'm doing some research for some show notes because I want to make sure that it is a very thorough and nuanced podcast episode. Propaganda is just information given. I think I described it this way in the previous podcast episode, but it's information given with the intent to mislead, to misdirect. I'm just going to throw things out there that are going to then give power to doubt. And this, I say, I've said it multiple times in various Reddit forums as well as podcast episodes, that is the 1-2 punch. If I can sow propaganda, if I can spread propaganda, that then in turn empower doubt, because that's what they do, then what I can do is cause you confusion and to wonder, and we don't know. And so we're sitting here twiddling our thumbs when we don't really know where we can go for information, for truth, etc. And so that's the intent for every single misconception from, back on to episode 1 to now episode 3 is, yes, to address the misconceptions, but I want to really tackle the propaganda that's underneath them all. And by attacking or tackling the propaganda perspective of this, I can then try and take power away from the doubt that is sowed through, I might add, the very effective propaganda. It's superbly effective. And it's not about money. It's not, hear me say this now, it's not about money. Most of the employers are going to spend enormous amounts of money on anti-union consultants whose sole objective is to retain power. That's it. They want power. They don't want to have to deal with people. They don't want to have to deal with contracts. They don't want to have to deal with the fact that there's something that they're held to other than the government law. And let's be honest for a second, I'm not slighting every single contractor or employer when I say this, but there are some who are like this. They don't even like being held to that. So when we get into these misconceptions, keep that in mind, that we are talking about not money, but power. And so we spread the propaganda, and we're looking to address and ultimately undermine the propaganda, because there is a podcast episode or a series, if you will, where you can refer someone else to it so they can sit here and listen to, somebody taking the time to address the propaganda talking points. Number 1 on this podcast episode, the union just wants your job for their members. The union just wants your job. The non-union, fill in the blank, ironworker, electrician, whatever, they just want your job to put their members in. What they're doing with this is they are effectively sowing seeds of not just doubt at this particular point with the propaganda, but they're also sowing seeds of somehow there's an animosity, because then the goal is to get you, the non-union ironworker, pipe fitter, whatever, non-union individual as a whole, to look at the union as an adversary. This is a propaganda talking point. The truth of this is, no, the union does not want that job for their members. They want to represent you. And they want you to be a union member so that you have the same benefits that their current members have. There's strength in numbers. We know this. You listening, you know this. We're a collection of United States that come together for the collective good. And the official tally for population is like 300, anywhere from 330 to 340, million, 340 million that have come together. You think 340 million are going to be stronger than, let's say, 10 million somewhere else? Absolutely. That's what you have going on here. It's not that the union wants your job for their members. They want you to be a member, and they want you covered under a collective bargaining agreement, and they want the same protections extended to you because there's strength in numbers. And I might add, and this was not a talking point, and it still isn't, but I might add that a rising tide lifts all boats, meaning non-union employees get some benefit just from the fact that the union exists anyway. You can go and check out the positive ripple effects of the UAW. That's a podcast episode if you want more information. It's also an article. It's under the musings tab on the website. But you get benefits there. But it's not the same as if you're a union member. And so when you come together, I'm the employer in this perspective, and I just want to sow the seeds of doubt and sow the seeds of animosity to somehow right out the gate pit you against the union, because I want to make them seem like a third. We talked about this last episode, but I want to make them seem like a third party. I want to make them seem like they're just coming in. There's some urethral thing. They are a collection of people that have come together and want better. They want better, and they want better for you too. Simple as that. So the union just wants your job for their members. It's a propaganda talking point. It's not true. All right? Not true at all. Talking point and misconception number 2. The union will make you go on strike. Okay. 2023 has been the most robust year for labor in probably 2 decades. And the reason why is because workers have been squeezed so much that it's like trying to get blood from a turnip. And people are so sick and so tired. It's why you are seeing there's a lot going on here when it comes to this, but the youth, you can go and listen to Lies We Tell Young People, episode 1 or 2. And you can also read some various articles. There's probably some scatterings throughout some of the other podcast episodes, but when you really, Scott Galloway has a real good TED talk about this. The youth are being screwed, and they're being screwed over, to be blunt with you, by a lot of older folks. And he brings out some good data points by this. So they don't feel like they have anything to lose in the first place. They're like, I don't have anything to lose anyway. And that's one of the most effective weapons, if you will, that anti-union individuals and anti-union advocates use, is the doubt and the uncomfortability that you could lose stuff. Well, when you play your cards this way and young people feel like they don't have anything to lose in the first place, now you have the most pro-union generation on record. And rightly so. They're going on strike. People are going on strike. And what you are effectively seeing is gains. The idea that the union will make you go on strike, they bring this out to sow seeds of doubt in you. And you say, well, I don't want to go on strike. I don't want to go on strike at all. This is not what I want. It's not a guarantee that you're going to go on strike, number 1. Number 2, there are a lot of situations that take place when you are dealing with an employer, and striking is the last thing. But striking has become successful in the recent years. And the reason why is because it is one of the most powerful tools working men and women have together. When they come together to form solidarity, okay? When workers come together and collectively stand together and say, no more, that's it. You see changes. Sometimes it does happen via a strike, and we're seeing more of it happen because, let's face it, many of us probably feel like we don't have much to lose. I totally understand that perspective, and I totally understand that point. So what your employers and anti-union advocates attempt to do is sow the seed that you're automatically going to go on strike, and that's not true. We never know. I have worked for employers, and I have been at different locals around with union members that haven't striked in their entire life, and they've been able to successfully negotiate numerous contracts, doing all kinds of stuff. But at the end of the day, what I would say is, what is your life worth? What is what you're doing, your family, your time? What is all that worth? Is it worth getting exploited over and over and over again? Or there comes a time when you've been backed into a corner and you say, I've had enough of this. You got to think about these things. So the idea that your union is going to make you automatically go on strike is a ridiculous notion. It's just meant to sow seeds of doubt and animosity, again, between a urethral third party, when in reality, what we are talking about is other union members who want to represent you and bring you into the fold so that your wages and your benefits and your job site conditions can improve. So we can all improve. A rising tide, remember, lifts all boats. Number 3, unions are based on seniority and not merit. I've been an iron worker for 23 years now. I have never seen this. The only union that I'm aware of that has some level of seniority established in it is the longshoring. The longshoremen's is not too far away from me, and they do have some seniority. But once you get in and you do, well, I wouldn't say pay your dues, but you know what I mean when I say pay your dues. You get in and work. Not everything is going to be handed to you right out the gate. Once you get in, you get going. But the idea that there's going to be some level of seniority the second that you organize in from a company, if you will, because that's the talking point, is usually when employers are trying to stave off a union drive. There is no established seniority at your company. You're the seniority. You've been there the whole time, and you're voting to become union. So this idea that somehow it's based on seniority is a bit disingenuous. And I think by now, through the various episodes that I've talked about and laid a little bit of groundwork in, we can certainly see that, yes, it's a bit of propaganda meant to sow discord and then, of course, empower doubt. You don't know. That's the genius part about the doubt perspective, is that if I sow a seed, in this case, that it's based on seniority, you don't know. And now my propaganda lives rent free in your head. It's up here, knocking around in your skull, and you continually bring it up and you're doubtful. Because remember, it isn't just this specific piece of propaganda. I think I addressed 4 or 5 in the first episode. I think I addressed 4 or 5 in the second episode. So that's either 8 or 10. And now we're talking about 4 or 5 more. All of these pieces, misconceptions, talking points, and whatnot, people are sowing seeds of doubt. They're dropping little nuggets. And all of this comes together to fill the void with a tremendous torrent of doubt, which is exactly what it's meant to do. So the idea that unions are based on seniority and not merit, and especially when you are in an organizing drive, you want your company, it could be in the trades, it could be manufacturing, it doesn't really matter to me. The idea that they're based on seniority, think about it for 1 second. You are the seniority. You're the one that's been there. So you're the one, even if it were a talking point, which is not, you would have seniority. So dismiss it as propaganda. Talking point number 4. Unions take away a worker's right to choose. I almost don't even know where to go with this, because the idea that they take away a worker's right to choose what? Choose what? If you're saying choose and have a right to choose to work for less, yeah, we do that. That's for sure, because we want you getting paid more, want you getting paid benefits, want you getting paid health insurance, want you getting paid what I would say is market value. I don't want you getting paid less. And if you want to actually get paid less, I would say you might want to get your head checked, because the idea that you're just going to go into work and say, well, I'll work for you for less. It's like, if that's the right to choose, then yeah, let's have that discussion. That's not what they mean. The idea that it takes away a worker's right to choose is loosely based upon the fact that you don't have a contract. I talked about this in the previous podcast episode. But you're in a but it bears importance to talk about it. Just lay a little bit of groundwork for this point. You're in contracts for just about everything in your life: your mortgage, your electrical, your gas, your cell phone, your car, your insurance. All that stuff is effectively a contract. And you go onto a website, click this box. By clicking this box, you are basically asserting that you're adhering to the terms and conditions. It's a contract. That's what it is. Everything has a contract. And so this idea then, this is a very disingenuous talking point, and I'm going to lay the ground. I'm going to let you know why. We'll weave this together, and I'll show you why. But the idea that you don't have a contract when you go to work for someone, which is what a collective bargaining agreement is. It's a contract. It stipulates what the contractor or the employer will adhere to. And so this idea then that I'm taking away a worker's right to choose, it's an exceptionally sly way of saying if you're covered under a contract, you don't have freedom to choose. They are playing on people's, first off, they're sowing doubt, which I've already explained that. But they're also playing on this love of individuality in America. Well, this whole idea that it's a nice fairy tale, right? We're going to pull myself up by my bootstraps, but let's be honest here for a second. The power of one, even though one person, I say this routinely on, in article form and on podcasts, is that you never really know just how much influence you can have. Don't dismiss the power of one. What's really likely to happen when we're talking about job site conditions, health and safety, as far as retirement goes, whether it's a pension fund or a 401k or whatever, is one person likely to achieve something, or is 1,000 member body likely to achieve something? I think we probably know the answer to this. And so what this talking point ultimately does is unions take away a worker's right to choose. I'm trying to sew this in there. I'm not even going to tell you what we're going to take away the right to choose. That's what they're doing. I'm not going to go into a long list of things that it's going to take away, because then I'm giving you concrete. But if I keep it in the spatial, if I keep it in the unknowns, well, what are they taking away from me to choose? That's the goal. It's just nothing but doubt. And it's to sow seeds of doubt into you. And so you're sitting here thinking, well, what am I losing my right to choose? What am I losing here? It's not true. It's a negative talking point. It's a misconception. But it's sowed intentionally, and it's really effective. And for all the talk, let me just say this, and I wasn't going to talk about this, but I'll go ahead and say this because this needs to be said too. For all the talk of language being hijacked, language has been hijacked for a long time. Case in point, because this point is very, very similar to quote unquote right to work. I don't really have the time. That deserves its own miniseries by itself. But saying right to work, you have a right to work, is very, very closely related to unions take away a worker's right to choose. Right to choose what? Choose for less? I mean, that's what it ultimately boils down to. It's the same thing. Right to work. It's very, very disingenuous. I might tip my hat to the architects of this, because it's a very disingenuous way to sow seeds of doubt and to establish propaganda talking points. It's an amazingly effective narrative. And it's one that is super widespread. But the idea that unions take away a worker's right to choose is crazy to me. So that's talking point number 4. So as a quick recap for this podcast episode here, we laid a little bit of foundational groundwork talking about propaganda and how negative propaganda really is, but propaganda is sowed so that it can empower doubt. We also want to sow the seeds of animosity. And then we covered the union just wants your job for their members. Incorrect. They want you to be their members so that they can represent more people, and a rising tide can then lift all boats. United we stand, divided we fall. Point number 2, the union will make you go on strike. I already touched on this, but the idea that you're just going to become union or go on strike right away and I'm going to make you and this is what's going to happen, being very disingenuous with that talking point as well. Number 3, unions are based on seniority and not merit. Look, if you're in an organizing drive, guess who's the seniority? It's you, the existing individual at this place of employment who's looking to vote. That's it. It's a misconception. It's a negative talking point, and it's not true. And number 4, unions take away a worker's right to choose. To choose what? To choose to work without a contract so that you know emphatically what I'm going to get paid, when I'm going to get paid, what the job site conditions are supposed to be, and what my schedule is. Because if you don't have a contract, you don't have any of these worked out. At-will employment leaves you exceptionally vulnerable. And those are the 4 common misconceptions and talking points that we are dealing with in this podcast episode. Again, this is podcast episode number 3 when it comes to this. There are 2 others. I encourage you, if you're listening to this and you haven't listened to the other 2, to go over, listen to them, like, share, subscribe. Let's begin the conversation. Thanks for listening.